In 1995 and 96, Tom Brady worked with the Michigan Scout team. At this point in his football journey, he lacked the polished mechanics we see today and threw more like a baseball catcher. After all, he was drafted into the MLB in 1995. Michigan's chosen starter was Scott Dreisbach, but he either got injured or benched for multiple seasons in a row. The chosen backup was Brian Griese, who beat out Brady multiple years straight. At one point, Brady was so angry about not getting the starting job that he nearly transferred to Cal. In 1997, Brady and Griese were at it again. Some members of the team called it a tie, with the tiebreaker going to the older, more experienced Griese. Others said Brady was no doubt the better quarterback in camp. Either way, Michigan couldn't go wrong. They went undefeated, and Griese was ready for the NFL after having just completed a magical season where he unknowingly started over the greatest player in the sport's history. Before we get to Griese's NFL career, I first want to share one of my favorite Tom Brady stories from the 1998 Michigan offseason. Okay, so here it is. In Ann Arbor, they still wince every time someone recounts the infamous story of Autograph Day, Brady's junior year. Michigan fans, still glowing from winning a co-national championship the previous season, 1997, poured into the stadium and formed a line 50 yards long. They patiently waited to get a signature from the man everyone assumed would be the Wolverine starter, following in Brian Griese's footsteps. But it wasn't Brady they were lining up for. It was freshman phenom Drew Henson, a Michigan high school legend. After a few minutes, someone ran to get Henson a table and a chair, and across the field, Brady stood by the tunnel for an hour, humiliated, signing his name only a handful of times. We'll circle back to what happened to Drew Henson later in the video, but for now, I guess kind of around that time, Griese was drafted by the Broncos in the third round of the 1998 NFL Draft. Months earlier, the Broncos had just won their first Super Bowl with legendary quarterback John Elway. That next season, the Broncos went back-to-back, and Elway rode off into the sunset, leaving Griese as the heir to the throne. At this point, he had only thrown 3 passes in his career, with one of them being an interception. Although he threw for 3 touchdowns in his first start, the team had stumbled out the gate, going 0-4. And to make matters worse, 1998 NFL MVP running back Terrell Davis suffered a knee injury that would put him out for the season. That injury would be a turning point for Davis's career, with the total combined production in his final 3 years in the league failing to match any single other year in his career. This was a nightmare scenario for Griese, who once looked like he was stepping into a great situation any young quarterback would dream of. Still, in 2000, he managed to put together quite the rebound campaign, throwing for 19 touchdowns to just 4 interceptions with a 7-3 record and a Pro Bowl appearance. Unfortunately, later in that season, he suffered a separated shoulder injury that caused him to miss several games, including the Broncos' brutal playoff loss to the eventual Super Bowl champion Ravens. Over the next 2 years, Griese failed to replicate his Pro Bowl efforts as the Broncos narrowly missed the playoffs. In 2003, Denver released Griese and instead opted to roll with Jake Plummer. Griese then signed with the Dolphins as a serviceable backup. That was the same franchise as Father Bob won 2 Super Bowls with. Brian, though, went 3-2 during his time there. After that, he found more consistent playing time in Tampa. But in his second season there, he tore his ACL. In 2006, the Bears brought him in to compete with Rex Grossman. Although Griese outplayed his competition in the preseason, the Bears still went with the often injured Grossman for his potential. The team managed to make the Super Bowl, with Grossman often being named as one of the worst quarterbacks to ever start in the big game. In 2007, it took 3 weeks for the Bears to bench Grossman for Griese. After a lackluster showcase, Griese eventually injured his shoulder, and the Bears failed to even make the playoffs. That offseason, the Bucs showed intense interest in trading for Brett Favre, but couldn't get a deal done, so they settled for Griese. Jeff Garcia started most of the season, but he did get benched at points for Griese. After the Bucs released Griese in 2009, he decided to retire. Altogether, he threw for 119 touchdowns in his career. He was always a serviceable starter or one of the best backups in the league. He probably could have kept doing that for a few more years, but he was also quite injury prone. So he headed to ESPN, where he worked as a college football analyst for several years. In 2020, he switched to Monday Night Football. Then this past offseason, he made another career change, becoming the quarterback's coach for the 49ers. So now that we've summed up Griese's career, let's take it back to that 1998 Michigan season, the one that occurred after that infamous autograph day. Even now, as a redshirt junior, Tom Brady was still forced into a competition with freshman phenom Drew Henson. Brady won the job, but Henson still got to play in 9 games. Michigan ended that season with a Citrus Bowl win. Most people actually forget this Brady season even existed because the next one was more memorable. So the next year, there was a unique pressure to play Henson over Brady. For one, Henson was rated as the nation's top quarterback coming out of high school, and he was instantly a fan favorite, having grown up in Michigan. But maybe most importantly, there was a fear with him being such a talented baseball player that he would bolt for the Yankees, who drafted him, gave him a $2 million bonus, and offered him another $2.7 million if he gave up football. So head coach Lloyd Carr instituted an unconventional strategy of playing Brady in the first quarter and Henson in the second, then going with the hot hand after that. He didn't give Brady a full-time commitment until late in the season. After that, Brady wins the Orange Bowl against Alabama with 5 total touchdowns, and, well, you know the rest of his story. As for Henson, he had a successful junior season, then bolted for the Yankees. Unfortunately, he only played in 8 games at the major league level, but the Texans were previously enticed enough to draft him in the 6th round during his baseball career in 2003. Ironically, he went higher than Brady at 192 overall. In 2004, the Texans traded him to the Cowboys for a 3rd-round pick. He started 1 game for the injury-ridden Cowboys as a 3rd stringer. In 2005, he was once again 3rd string, playing behind Tony Romo and none other than Drew Bledsoe, the man Tom Brady once backed up as a rookie. Henson then played in NFL Europe and didn't find his way back on an NFL roster until the 2008 winless Detroit Lions took him on in his final year. Once retired from playing, Henson worked for ESPN for 2 years, then as a minor league hitting coach for the Yankees, and most recently as an NFL scout. He's worked for the Senior Bowl and as a coaching intern for the Steelers. All in all, Henson is part of the Brady tale. I think he's a big reason Brady fell to the 6th round. Why would an NFL team want to draft a guy who could barely win the starting job in college? You could even argue that the Patriots have the Yankees to thank for creating such a bizarre scenario to give them the biggest draft bargain in the history of the league. If you enjoyed this video, then you'll most likely also enjoy the video I made on what happened to the 6 quarterbacks drafted before Tom Brady. I'll link that one in the description, or you can click it on your screen right now.